Thank you very much. My name is Ralph Menon. I have a question for Professor Thomas Astell-Burt. Virtual reality is becoming more refined with AI. Apple is going to bring out ProVision soon. Nature mimicked by virtual reality, is there any investigations if that has the same effect than nature bathing as and modifying cities as you have described?
Thank you very much. Ralph, is it?
Ralph, yeah.
Yes, nice to meet you, Ralph. Yes, this is a blossoming area of research. Colleagues over in the US have been doing some trials on this, and they've been able to show that virtual nature is better than no nature at all, but it's no substitute for the real thing. But I can see how, for example, for people who are bedbound, very difficult to get outside without regular help, this could actually be a very valuable intervention, so we shouldn't stop trying to make it better. Personal experience putting on the Oculus and all the rest of it, I suddenly become so aware that I might be stared at by loads of people and I can't see what they're doing. So I become very self-aware myself. Maybe I'm just odd in that way. But I think that we have some way to go to try and make this a more acceptable proposition for everyone, not just those people for whom this is kind of a last resort. So in some, yes, but we've got some way to go.
Any other questions? Like down here. Hey. Oh, sorry. There we go.
Oh, sorry. Oh. Thank you. Thank you for all your nice presentation. I'm Faisal from Sydney Water. So I'm working in the Sydney Water, which is solely an isolated company, isolated organization, which dedicated for giving the drinking water and wastewater services. But recently we are focusing on the greening perspective, how as a Sydney Water as the authority can contribute to cooling and greening of the cities. So considering all your, I actually saw all are the very fascinating, the effect of heat and the things we know. And then as a solution, Thomas, my PhD supervisor, he presented the solution, how heat can be mitigated. And this is the green space and rethinking about the urban structure typologies. But my question is, in all your research, how you see the need of water to keep the city green and cool? Because under extreme heat, the water is also in stress. And we know during the drought situation, we have different level of restrictions on water uses that keep our cities less watering on the green areas. So in all your future research or even current research, how you integrate the perspective of water or the alternative sources of water may come from to keep city green and cool?
I can come on that very briefly and pass on. By the way, Dr. Faisal Shuvo here, who's one of my first PhD students and has gone to do great things with Sydney Water. So thank you for coming. I think that this reminds me of Glenn Albrecht's solastalgia concept, where we feel the environment around us is being decimated for in his case, the mining sector up in the Hunter Valley, through to just dilapidation and ruin through neglect and poor maintenance. Part of this problem here is that it links directly to our mental health, our sense of anguish, our sense of these areas are in decline, so is my community. I feel somewhat like everything is falling apart. I might move away, and then you end up with a community in decline as well. None of these things are good. One of the precursors or the triggers of this might be simple, that we are failing to irrigate and maintain those green spaces, which are no longer green. They become rather brown. The vegetation dies. No greater way to inflict solastalgia on a local community than to do exactly that. Maybe others have points of view.
Look, my hobby is permaculture. And within permaculture, we're trying to It's looking at everything. Like water has a high value, and we kind of need to view resources. And this is what permaculture teaches me. It's very much like Buddhism, that people look at water as a resource personally. And Sydney Water does a great campaigning on this, and see what we can do within our gardens and broaden it, and regenerative agriculture look upon water in the same way. How you harvest water, how you collect water. My friends call me a water harvester because I collect water all the time, including from using a dehumidifier, and you can then, instead of the extractor fan, so I collect all the water from dehumidifiers within the bathrooms and use it to water my garden. So you look at water in a different way. Yep.
I might add something. That's good point. From the heat perspective, especially people living lower socioeconomic status tend to escape or hide to this shopping centers with the air conditioning. And then if we could like those doing in the Saudi Arabia or the China, make even we have some areas in the city center, we vaporize them and then making a sort of the fog or humidity, and then it will reduce the temperature significantly. That would be if we can have more spaces like that, that would be easier and ecological solution for this. And then it's also good from the air pollution perspective. This is one of the interventions China did, create this sort of the particularized water to catch the airborne particles and put them down to the earth. So in these two ways, if we can add this concept to the planning of the greener cities or something, it may add with the reasonable cost effectiveness, I would say.
Catherine?
I'm
Lee.
sorry, I was just going to pick up in 2019, 2020, we managed to burn millions of hectares of our green spaces and degrade air quality hugely. What are the health signatures that have emerged from that? Do we yet know? And as a catastrophic intervention, it probably ranks locally on the same scale as COVID and lockdowns. And I'm wondering if you can see any of the impacts, any of you actually, because it's relevant to each of your talks.
Okay, I might start. Thanks, Stephen. Our very nice colleague in Tasmania, Professor Faye Johnston, did an economic analysis. I think you mentioned about the Sydney Black Summer event, and then she also looked at the Victorian effect consequences, and it's over 2 billion or something like that. And then she published data in the iScience or something. So then, and the health economic impact was huge. We tried to look at these events in New South Wales data, but we were not able to clearly see the huge effect, most likely because of the bushes were burned in the mountain area. The population was a bit less than the the city center or heavily densified areas. That's my understanding.
Yeah, I mean, I think considering the health economic side of things and actually building that into decision making at every level, I think, one of the things that we as medics need to think about is how we get better at including the contribution of heat and other health, other environmental factors in presentations to hospital and in death side of things. So in the mortality side of things, actually including heat, stress and or other environmental factors in death certificate certification, I think is another factor that's really important. And how do we get better at actually quantifying that so that we can actually take action and have metrics that we can actually shift? Kaz, I know you've thought about this probably a fair bit as well. I mean, obviously you do this at a population level, but on your day-to-day, care of patients, do you include that in a way that could be potentially measurable in a more standardized fashion?
in the death certificate?
Death certification or hospitalisation, how do we actually begin to count this in a standardised fashion that can actually impact decisions?
Right. That's great point. There are two separate from two separate places, but similar data. So previously, like 30 to 40 years ago, we are more susceptible to the cold weather. But now we observe more event in the hot weather historically. So then there's something changes in our bodies over the last 20, 30 years. And then we are less immune to the heat. So then the less event in the colder temperatures or climate in these cities, but the more event with the higher temperature. So one of the key factor here, it would be obesity, because the cardiac output is even resting higher than normal people, normal body habitus. But these sort of things could be could explain the mechanisms. But definitely, we are keen to do more epidemiological study to identify the close relationships between them.
Terrific.
Uh,
Go for it.
Hi, Kath Williams. I have one question for Kaz and one for Thomas, if that's okay. Kaz, on my way to work today, I noticed the incredible haze driving, because we've all got our lovely fires. And I'm just wondering, in your opinion, are we doing ourselves harm by having these wonderful fires in our homes and contributing to this haze across what should be a really fresh, lovely atmosphere?
From the domestic heating.
Yeah, domestic heating. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was crazy enough to start air pollution study when I was in Tasmania. One of the places the best air quality. But our colleague did an intervention to put the efficiency of the burning is the key. So little device to increase the efficiency, less the harmful particulate emissions to it. So then the switching to the more electronic, less fuel dependent source of the heat, even for the cooking, and also the warming up the places would be another important intervention which governments need to think about it.
Thank you. And just quickly, Thomas, so I was very much a beneficiary of Camberdown Rest Memorial Park in my former days, and I know what you mean as far as integration, but I feel like the further west we go, we actually have access to beautiful bushland. I live on 10 acres, but the metabolic health and the loneliness seems to get worse. So do we need to start looking at rural, regional differently to we do cities? And second part to the question is, how much does the phone take away? Because I feel like now we're all in parks looking at our phones. Do we actually need a specific intervention to get that away as well? Thanks.
Well, thank you very much, Catherine, and nice to meet you. So second question first, because why not? There was a randomized trial conducted in the US, Bill Sullivan, University of Urban Champaign, I think. And he did it with his students, and he divided them up randomly, 50% over 50%, and they all won the lottery. They all got to go out and miss class and spend some time in the park as long as they came back. But here's the caveat there. 150% had all their electronic equipment confiscated. They had to leave it in a secure box. The others, be my guest, whatever you want to do, right? And what did they find? You can probably guess what they found. Those folks who had their phones confiscated, they had meaningful improvements, even within a space of an hour, in the ability to concentrate, feeling better about themselves, and these determinants, well, although small scale, but determinants of mental health. For the folks who had all the IT equipment on them, it was a complete waste of time. They literally named the paper How to Waste a Break. I'll send it to you if you wish. It's fantastic. The focus on cities is the majority of my research, and this is because by far and away the majority of us live in cities now, and we are, unfortunately, through decades and decades and decades of frankly boneheaded decision-making, we are systematically obliterating nature in our cities. That does not mean things are all hunky-dory and fine and fantastic in rural areas, but it does mean that we probably need to take a different approach. One of my studies over in the US, which is a rather different scenario over here, 50 cities from all over the country, we found that more greenery nearby was actually associated with increased rates of cardiovascular disease mortality and all-cause mortality. And we hypothesized that this was because, and get this, we know that America is a rather car-dependent culture with lots of green space, but nowhere to walk to when you get outside your front door. So everybody drives. Nobody moves across their streets to meet other people. Nobody knows their neighbors necessarily because of that. Physical activity through the floor. Everybody's car dependent, and we can see some of that over here too as well. This isn't necessarily distinctly rural, but it is very suburban. We have the same problems here in Australia too. You can see we've got a long way to go, and I hope to work with you all on it.
Guys, I want to pull Kim out.
Just the wood fire heaters, it is a significant problem. When I do house calls in Vineyard during winter, I can't see the road in front of me. In terms of legislation, Victoria, for a very long time, when you sold a house, you had to get rid of your wood fire heater. When I speak to every single politician in the local area about wood-fired heaters, they're too afraid to do anything about it. They'll say, I spoke to my local federal member and he said, oh yeah, they shouldn't be in urban areas. Like the guy next to me had a wood fire heater and I spoke to him about it. And like, it's really near impossible because they're afraid. But it's a significant problem. People die from the air pollution from wood fire heaters. And so that's still an ongoing advocacy.
So Kim, can I draw you out? Firstly, on Gemma's point about rubber hitting the roads, Kaz, Thomas have done this large-scale population-level epidemiological data. But guys, by the way, there's poster boards out there featuring all of these rock stars and news articles. Kim had a spectacular article in Sydney Morning Herald because you wrote cause of death as heat on a death certificate. So can you tell me about what motivated you to do that? Have you done it subsequently? And how has that been received? Did you get a call from a coroner saying, what the hell are you doing?
So that was Chuck, whose daughter even was holding his photo. So I've been looking after Chuck for 14 years. And he'd been a smoker for so long. He had quite severe peripheral vascular disease, ischemic heart disease, and he lived in social housing. His daughter and his daughter's family were also my patients. So this was during 2018, and you guys remember the heat waves around that time? And Chuck was on a scooter. So I remember the first time Chuck had heat exhaustion, he was in Kellyville shops and the AMBO was ringing me and saying, your patient won't get into the ambulance. He's got heat exhaustion. And so I just said, Chuck, just get into the ambulance. And this is about 2 weeks before he died. And so I was called on Saturday in December in 2018 by the police saying, your patient's dead. So I went to his unit and he was lying on the floor. There was a warm beer on the table and he was dead. And when we looked at the receipts on the table, he'd been to Bunnings that day on his scooter, drank half the beer, went to Bunnings and came back home and died. And heat was a contributory to his death. It was a cold day, he wouldn't have died. And so I wrote on the death certificate was a significant cause. And I wasn't cognizant at the time that I was doing something that was a big deal. It just was obvious to me. It was such a hot day and had been a series of hot days.
I mean, we're doing a bit of work with New South Wales Health around how we can get better dashboards for understanding clinical quality indicators and obviously outcomes. And one of the things that can help with this is obviously, you know, the kind of binary entries into the electronic medical records. And if we had it in the emergency department, in the admission notes, a kind of box that is, you know, did climate affect this? Was it heat? Was it, you know, other things? You know, I think that would actually be really helpful. And I think it's obviously something that we need to figure out how we address the areas where this is having the biggest impact so that we can, you know, implement some of the innovations in these areas.
Hi. I had a question kind of going back to the urbanisation piece and, you know, all the statistics about how the growth of populations in cities is just continuing, and the populations of cities, especially like Sydney, are just growing so much. I currently live in a local government area that's been historically increasingly stubbornly resistant to any zoning changes around increasing mid-density housing. And I've actually moved back to this area after kind of growing up there, and I'm now seeing signs from local council around, resistance to, zoning and more mid-density housing on the basis of keeping our green spaces. And it's a tension that's kind of interesting to resolve. I listened to the presentations today, and it's so clear how important green spaces are for health. But then, as a millennial also navigating Sydney's housing crisis, I also am very passionate around, increasing mid-density and affordable housing, which I suppose the question I have is, how do we resolve those tensions around the need to solve the housing crisis while also increasing green spaces?
Do that one. Okay, so planning is the most important portfolio in the state government, because you can have high density if it's planned well and still have green spaces. There is a lot of advocacy in this area by landscape architects, and there is Western Sydney University has an urban transformation research centre. There is the Sydney Committee. So this is an area of advocacy, and they do take politicians to areas that have high density but good green spaces. So it's to have people reimagine what we can live in. Current planning codes are just terrible. We've got basics codes, that's basic legislation for basic housing building codes, and we've got the national building codes. Both of them were reviewed last year. They're still inadequate. And I know a lot of people in the built environment who are advocating towards this area.
I didn't catch your name.
Lauren.
Lauren, nice to meet you. I would be making a beeline to chat with Dr. Faisal Shuva at the front here, because he actually illuminated something which blew my mind. Singapore, very interesting place. You can get from one side of it to another within an hour. One of the highest density cities in the world, and yet one of the greenest. We could learn a lot from our cousins overseas. Not only that, but whether you're in a more affluent area or a poorer area of Singapore, consistently high levels of green space, high quality green space, which people young and old can go out and enjoy. It can be done. We just need to look outside and see best case examples from other parts of the world. By the way, I know that New South Wales government is directly thinking about this at this moment in time. And I would say that things look bright on that part.
Question for Laura, and then.
Hi, my name is Desi. I'm an ecologist, and so I'm going to ask Professor Tom a very ecologist question, which is, did you look, or is there any work that looks at the effect of native trees versus introduced trees? And the reason why I ask this is because Dr. Faisal and Dr. Kim brought up some points about water use, and we have been planting a lot of inappropriate trees in the wrong places.
Thank you. Desi?
Yes.
Yes, great. Thank you very much, Desi. Nice to meet you. I've not specifically been able to differentiate or distinguish between native trees and non-native trees in the large-scale epidemiological studies. But from my understanding, when we plant palm trees, for example, which are looking somewhat nice in certain perceptions, I know that they offer extremely little shade, and they suck up all of the water, far more than others. So it doesn't sound like we're getting bang for buck if we're just planting palm trees everywhere. When you see palm trees, think maybe they could have done something a little bit differently there. I was invited to give the 8th biodiversity talk for the Glebe Society recently, and strong promoters of biodiversity within their increasingly dense suburb. And at the same time, issues related to a lot of leaf loss, pollen, and all the rest of it. London plane tree came up. So I wouldn't be surprised if actually we just went down the route of let's plant more native trees. We're probably onto a surefire thing.
Hi, I'm Laura. I'm an emergency physician across the road and love the DEA. My question relates to something that you brought up, Kim, about idle off, and that it's starting to be picked up around schools in Lane Cove, really prevalent overseas. But there's no policy that I've seen at the hospital. And quite often you'll come into the ambulance bay. The ambulances are pretty good about turning their engines off, but the patient transport vehicles will sit there for 2 hours with their engine on because they need to keep the heat or the air conditioning on. Does anyone know of any programs, policies that are around for New South Wales Health that might help that?
Sounds like they need to be electric.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
One more question up there.
I think we're 1.5 minutes left.
Okay.
Do you want to borrow my microphone?
I thought I had a few interesting things to add. Hi, my name's Leanne. I'm coming from the Department of Climate Change, Energy, Environment, Water today. I thought I'd mention you should Google the Sydney Air Quality Study that was done. It actually found that wood heaters are the main contributor to health issues within any PM 2.5 emission. So it outbeats industries, cars and everything. So it's really fascinating. I thought I'd also mention I used to work in the team in the Greening Our City team, so I've worked previously with you, Thomas. But I found out there was actually a researcher in Western Sydney Uni who's actually studied the benefits of planting native trees. I'll get your details and I'll send it to you because I cannot recall. No, it wasn't Sebastian, it was a different lady, sorry. I had a question because I'm currently working in air policy and I'm trying to find a way to boost the work that's planning is currently doing and connecting to green and blue infrastructure. In the sense I'm looking at doing an economic analysis between air quality and trees, for example, and green infrastructure. Are you guys aware of any, I guess, research and studies that would be of benefit to me? I guess. Sorry, that's very personal, but yes.
No, I think this is a good forum to ask that question. Leanne, good to see you again. Indirectly, perhaps, we've done recently a study which we're able to quantify the health benefits of tree canopy and green space in terms of hospital admissions that didn't happen because people didn't have heart attacks requiring them to be shipped off to emergency departments. And we were able to show that compared to less than 10%, those who had 30% or more tree canopy nearby, we ended up saving $20 million per 100,000 people per year. In this case, just from heart attacks that didn't happen. Now, that is no way a definitive figure because it doesn't take into account, medications that weren't necessary. It doesn't take into account all the other range of health issues that were prevented, such as mental health and other physical health conditions too. But it's just an entry level for a wide program of research that we're now doing. I'll be happy to share that paper with you. Maybe others have.
Fantastic. I'm a bit nervous about Nancy over here, but and I think it's 1 minute past 11. Is that our time? Yeah.
So guys, I think it's time for morning tea. Just before you head out, have a look around you. I was nervous. Not many people would turn up, and it's incredible. We have scientists, we have industry. Please make it a point to maybe speak to 3 people you don't know. Look to build collaborations. Tom said, I want to talk to you about a prescribing clinic, a nature prescribing clinic. I hazard, and I'm nervous to say this because you've given this great talk and I don't want to ruin a friendship before it started. I didn't think that in a group of people talking so much about the environment that we would all